Greetings, YouTube. This is Fragments of Memory, also known as your friendly neighborhood armchair philosopher. I was having a conversation tonight talking about how history really can't give you a full panoramic perspective. The reason I said that is that if you look at history now, when films do depictions of past events, we assume that everybody was running around wearing, for example, in the 70s, we assumed that everyone was running around wearing afros and bell bottoms, when in the 1970s, that wasn't necessarily always the case. There were people that wore hand me down clothes. There were people that did not engage in what was popular or what was in high fashion. So that was something that I just was speaking to. We were having this conversation tonight. And I realized, for example, that Hollywood's depictions of past events aren't necessarily accurate. And even I've often said in a lot of my vids that life in and of itself is a complicated thing. It's very complicated. It has nuances and levels and layers. And even with historical events, nothing happens in a vacuum. It isn't like, for example, during the Civil Rights Movement, we have Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King. And you was either Dr. Martin Luther King follower or Malcolm X follower, where there are some people who were neutral to that. And then there were some people who either followed Malcolm X or followed Martin Luther King. And then there were other civil rights leaders or other civil people campaigning for civil rights in this country. You had the Black Panther Party. You had people like Angela Davis and Stokely Carmichael. There's a really good film called The Black Power Mixtape. I think you need to Google that. The Black Power Mixtape. And that's something that you may want to consider. And even in war, things that led up to a war are multitudinous. It wasn't just this guy did this, therefore we had a war. Again, we speak to levels and layers and nuances and the like. So that's just something that I've really had to wrestle with. That even when I look in the events of my own life, much was going on around me that I wasn't aware of. And then there were things that were going on around me that I knew about or that I was a part of, and it all led to the building and shaping of my character. For example, I wasn't just playing RPGs with my friends and we going to use bookstores with my mother. There were other things going on within myself and around me. So the 90s wasn't all about wearing cross colors. I mean, people aren't raised in a vacuum. Life is complicated, and it can be messy and it can be convoluted. And I think that's the problem, is when we deal with when we deal with each other, we forget that we're not a monolith. That life is mosaic, that life has patterns and tapestries and lines and textures. It isn't just a you're boom or you're boom. Now, don't get me wrong. There are some things that are boom and boom. Like this is a fixed point. This is a fixed point. But then there's a lot of things that aren't. I think back to an episode of Doctor Who during David Tennant's run. And one of the things that David Tennant said was, he's telling this woman about time. A lot of people think that time is this strict progression between cause and effect. But from a non-subjective or a subjective, non-linear approach, it's all sort of a big ball of wibbly wobbly timey wimey. He couldn't explain it, but that's that's probably the best way to explain it is that it's not just this happened and then this happened, or this one thing was going on and everything else didn't exist. It's that, oh, while this was going on, this also was going on. And while this person was doing this, someone else was doing this right at the same time. Now, I may sound as though I'm rambling, but it's just something about, be careful when you read your history books because not everything is clear cut. Even as I listen to the political pundits and they argue about what was going on in this country, everybody seems to want to paint everything. This is all black. This is all white. Well, no, there were subtleties and levels and layers, and you have to understand the circumstances surrounding what was going on in this day. And again, nothing happens in a vacuum. No one's raised in a vacuum. No events happen in a vacuum. We live in an interdependent world. There's no such thing as an independent world or a dependent world, but there's this sort of interdependence going on. So that's just something I've been really thinking about. Like, we don't have the full knowledge of every situation. Um, we can be blinded by our own biases, our own slants. And that's just something that I really wanted to sort of throw out here in YouTube because it does seem that we can be blinded by our own agendas. Even our memories can be at times faulty. And we highlight that which we want to highlight and we downplay that which we want to downplay when we remember things. Life is a trip, right? But I really want you guys to this is just me at least expressing myself, just getting my thoughts out here. Just think about that life is complicated. It can be beautiful, it can be ugly, but life is a beautiful mosaic. It's not all one thing, and even people are not monolithic. This is something, everyone has nuances to them. Now, there might be a predominant character trait, and there might be certain proclivities and propensities that I might have, but we all have the potential for anything. For example, just because I don't run my mouth about how sexual I am, doesn't necessarily mean that I myself am not a sexual being. Or if I don't run my mouth about this particular subject or that particular subject, it doesn't mean that I'm not thinking about it. It just means this is my area of focus. The RZA of the Wu-Tang Clan, he had a really good book called The Tao of the Wu. And some of his 5%er ideologies I would disagree with. But one thing he did say, he talked about the audio. He talked about that audio, about, we all have our basses and our trebles. And maybe I'm citing the example wrong, but like each level is cranked up. Like we have our positives and our negatives, and sometimes our negatives are cranked up. And sometimes our positives are toned down. All of them are in us, and all of them are a part of the spectrum, but there's levels and there's levels and layers to a person, just like there's levels and layers to life. If you got something out of this video, just let me know. And if you didn't, well, just, I guess, pass by my video, I guess. But hey, this is just me trying to make some sense of some things. So take care. Be easy like Sunday morning.